Have you ever watched a bride grab a microphone at her own wedding reception just to publicly humiliate her older sister in front of 180 people? Picture this. You are standing in the back of a luxury country club in South Dakota. You wear a plain black dress because you were ordered to blend in with the catering staff. The crystal chandeliers cast a bright glare over the state's wealthiest ranchers, politicians, and business owners. My sister Tiffany tapped her manicured fingernail against her champagne flute. The room quieted down. She pointed the microphone directly at me. "She is just the maid, so ignore her," Tiffany laughed. Her voice bounced off the vaulted ceiling. My mother Brenda stood beside her. She leaned into the microphone. "She serves, she does not shine." I stood by the kitchen doors. I felt the heat of 100 eyes turning my way. I did not cry. I did not drop my gaze. I just smiled. A second later, the groom's parents pushed their heavy mahogany chairs back. The scraping sound echoed like a gunshot. These were the billionaires funding the entire event. They walked past the bridal table, ignoring Tiffany, and stopped right in front of me. The groom's father bowed his head in a deep, undeniable show of respect. The entire room went dead silent. 15 minutes later, my mother's phone screen lit up on table 1. It vibrated until it slid near the edge of the tablecloth. 49 missed calls. Her boutique was being foreclosed on, and her credit lines were frozen. She looked across the room at me. Her face turned the color of ash. "What did you do?" she screamed. Before I tell you how this moment happened, please take a second to like and subscribe to Grape Vengeance. But only if you believe arrogant people always get the karma they deserve. Also, tell me your age and drop your location and local time in the comments. I would love to know where you are listening from. Now let me take you back 8 months to where this nightmare began. It was a Tuesday evening in Sioux Falls. Snow hit my apartment window with a quiet tapping sound. I sat at my desk looking over a non-disclosure agreement for a corporate client. To the rest of the world, and especially to my family, I was a failure. I drove a 4-year-old sedan. I lived in a modest walk-up. Tiffany was the golden child. She was 24, a former pageant queen who treated our mother's credit cards like an endless ATM. My phone vibrated on the desk. "Brenda." I picked it up. "Come to the house," Brenda ordered. The tone in her voice left no room for debate. "Tiffany is engaged. We have work to do." She did not ask me if I was free. She hung up before I could reply. When I walked into my mother's house an hour later, the smell of expensive floral arrangements filled the living room. Tiffany sat on the velvet sofa, staring at a diamond ring that looked far too heavy for her finger. Brenda did not hug me. She did not ask how my day was. She handed me a heavy 3-page printed list. "You are going to handle the administrative work for the wedding, Casima," she said. "You just type emails for pennies all day anyway. Tiffany needs a real support staff." I looked down at the paper. It was a list of vendor negotiations, contract reviews, and budget tracking. It was a full-time job. "I am not a bridesmaid," I asked. My voice stayed level. Tiffany scoffed. "You do not fit the aesthetic, Casima. Plus, you need to work." I ran my thumb over the edge of the paper. They thought I was a low-level secretary. They had no idea that my typing job was actually running one of the Midwest's most elite corporate crisis management firms. I handled financial restructurings for ultra-high net worth clients. I tore apart hostile takeovers before breakfast. To my family, I was a nobody. I looked at my mother's demanding posture and my sister's smug smile. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. "I will handle the contracts," I said. I decided to let them keep believing I was just a typist. I had no idea they were about to drag me into a financial trap that would require every skill I had to dismantle. I walked out of my mother's house and pulled my coat tight against the bitter South Dakota wind. The 3-page list sat heavy in my coat pocket. I climbed into the driver's seat of my 4-year-old sedan, turned on the dome light, and unfolded the paper. Item 1. Call the bridal boutique and confirm the arrival of the imported lace veils. Item 2. Pick up Tiffany's dry cleaning by Thursday. Item 3. Address 300 custom save-the-date cards by hand in silver calligraphy. I traced my finger over the ink. There was no please or thank you written anywhere on the pages. It read like a shift schedule for a hotel employee. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered for a split second before catching. My mother hated this car. She called it a rolling embarrassment to the family name. Brenda drove a leased luxury that she could barely afford. She bought her clothes from high-end boutiques on credit. Tiffany drove a European sports car, also financed under Brenda's name. They believed that looking wealthy was the exact same thing as being wealthy. I preferred my sedan. It was reliable and, more importantly, it was paid off. I pulled out of their upscale, heavily mortgaged neighborhood and drove toward downtown Sioux Falls. I did not go to my modest apartment. Instead, I pulled into the underground parking garage of the tallest commercial glass building in the city district. I parked in a reserved spot badged through a private security door and took the elevator to the top floor. The door slid open to a pristine reception area. Silver letters mounted on the slate wall read, "White and Associates." My executive assistant David met me in the hallway, holding a secure tablet. "The board members in Chicago are ready for your decision," David said. "They are waiting for your final terms on the restructuring deal." I nodded, slipping the crumpled wedding to-do list into my briefcase. "Tell them I will join the secure line in 2 minutes." I walked into my corner office and shut the heavy oak door. I sat behind my mahogany desk and looked out over the city skyline. If Brenda or Tiffany ever walked into this room, their minds would fracture. To my mother and sister, I was just Casima, the girl who wore plain sweaters, drove an old car, and typed boring emails for a nameless Midwestern company. They thought I made $40,000 a year. They thought I clipped coupons to pay my rent. They had no idea that my typing job was actually running one of the most elite corporate crisis management firms in the region. I handled financial scandals, leveraged buyouts, and quiet restructurings for ultra-high net worth clients. I operated under ironclad non-disclosure agreements. My clients valued my discretion just as much as my strategy. I tore apart hostile corporate takeovers before my morning coffee. I picked up my office phone and dialed into the Chicago board meeting. For the next 45 minutes, I dictated the financial terms of a multi-million-dollar merger. I protected a family legacy from a predatory rival. I spoke with quiet authority, and men twice my age listened to every single word I said. When the call ended, the lead executive thanked me profusely. I hung up the phone, closed my laptop, and reached into my briefcase. I pulled out Brenda's crumpled piece of paper. I dialed the number for a local bakery to negotiate the price of a tiered fondant wedding cake. This toxic dynamic did not happen overnight. It started 20 years ago. When Tiffany was 8 years old, Brenda entered her in a regional beauty pageant. Tiffany won the crown. From that day forward, our entire household revolved around rhinestone tiaras, custom evening gowns, and expensive entry fees. Brenda took out a second mortgage just to fund Tiffany's journey to the state title. I was the quiet older sister. I was told to sit in the back row of the auditorium and hold their coats. I learned very early that in Brenda's eyes, human value was determined solely by how much attention you could draw. She craved the spotlight. I hated it. I preferred quiet power. While Tiffany spent her teenage years practicing her pageant wave, I spent mine studying market trends and corporate law. I moved out at 18, took out student loans, and built my empire in total silence. I let them call me a failure because their pity was the perfect camouflage. If they knew how much money I really had, Brenda would have drained my accounts to fund Tiffany's shallow lifestyle. My personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from Tiffany flashed on the screen. Make sure you tell the bakery I am allergic to imitation vanilla, the text read. And pick up my iced latte on your way to my apartment tomorrow. You are the best little wedding maid. I stared at the screen. Wedding maid. The words glowed in the dim light of my office. She did not call me her sister. She did not even offer the dignity of calling me a bridesmaid. She called me a maid. I did not text back a complaint. I did not ask for respect. I just typed a quick thumbs-up emoji and hit send. The next morning, I drove to Tiffany's luxury apartment complex, holding a cold plastic cup of iced coffee. The apartment was leased in Brenda's name, naturally. When I pushed the front door open, the living room looked like a hurricane of bridal magazines and fabric swatches had torn through it. Tiffany lay on a plush velvet sofa, staring at her phone screen, while a mobile nail technician painted her toes. Brenda was pacing the hardwood floor near the kitchen island. She did not look up when I walked in. She was holding a stack of red stamped envelopes. I recognized the harsh black font visible through the top window of the envelope. Final notice. Brenda shoved the stack of bills deep into her designer leather purse the exact second she noticed me watching her. "Did you address the save the dates?" Brenda snapped. She did not say good morning. She did not offer to take my coat. I walked over to the sofa and set the iced latte down on a coaster next to Tiffany. "Yes, I finished addressing all 300 envelopes last night," I said. My voice was calm and steady. Tiffany took a sip of the coffee without taking her eyes off her phone. "You used the silver ink, right?" she asked. "Because if you used black ink, they will look cheap and you will have to buy new cardstock and do it all over again." "I used the silver ink, Tiffany." "Good," Tiffany muttered. Brenda stopped pacing and leaned heavily against the marble kitchen counter. She rubbed her temples. Her diamond rings caught the morning sunlight pouring through the large windows. She looked exhausted. The heavy makeup around her eyes could not hide the dark circles forming underneath. "We have a serious problem," Cassima Brenda said. Her voice lost its usual commanding edge. It sounded thin, stretched tight with panic. I stood in the center of the room and waited. I already knew what the problem was. A woman who hides final notice envelopes in her purse cannot afford a luxury country club wedding. The facade was finally cracking under the weight of real math. The event coordinator at the Black Hills estate called me this morning. Brenda continued refusing to make eye contact with me. "They are demanding the venue deposit by the end of the week." Tiffany gasped loudly and dropped her phone on the sofa. "What do you mean, Mom? You told me the venue was secured." "It is secured, sweetie," Brenda rushed to say, plastering a fake, soothing smile on her face for the golden child. "It is just a minor administrative delay." Brenda turned her gaze back to me. The fake smile vanished instantly. She looked at me not like a daughter, but like a financial life raft she was preparing to puncture. I knew in my gut what she was about to ask. I knew she was going to demand I drain whatever meager savings she thought I had. And as I stood there, watching my mother sweat over a bill she could not pay, I realized this was my opening. I did not want to save her. I wanted to own the ground she walked on. I stood in the center of the living room while Brenda stared at me. Her hands gripped the edge of the marble kitchen island, her knuckles turned white. "They need $25,000 by Friday," Brenda said. Her voice was flat and cold. "The event coordinator will cancel the reservation if the funds do not clear the bank." "25,000, I repeated. I kept my tone carefully neutral. Tiffany sat up on the sofa. She pushed the mobile nail technician away, her fresh pedicure smeared across the velvet cushion, but she did not even notice the stain. "Mom, you promised me the Black Hills estate. You said the deposit was handled weeks ago." "It will be handled," Brenda snapped at her. Then she turned her sharp gaze back to me. "Cassima, you have money saved up. You never go on vacation. You drive a piece of junk. You must have that amount sitting in a basic savings account somewhere." I looked at the stack of red final notices stuffed inside her designer purse. She had ruined her own credit score to buy the illusion of wealth. Now the bill was due, and she expected me to act as her personal ATM. "That is my entire life savings," I lied. It was a fraction of what I made in a single morning, but I needed her to believe the narrative. "Your sister deserves a flawless start to her life," Brenda demanded. She walked around the kitchen island and stepped into my personal space. "This is a crucial moment for our family reputation. You need to write a check today. Empty your little savings account. If you do not do this for Tiffany, you can pack up whatever cheap gifts you bought and consider yourself removed from this family. You will not attend the wedding. You will not be welcome in my home." The ultimatum hung in the quiet air of the luxury apartment. It was classic Brenda. She weaponized family loyalty to fund her delusions of grandeur. She thought the threat of losing her affection would crush me. She did not realize I stopped craving her affection a decade ago. I looked at Tiffany. She was pouting, wrapping a silk robe tighter around her shoulders. She did not care if I went bankrupt. She only cared about securing a venue that would look perfect in her social media photos. "I will handle it," I said. I kept my face blank. Brenda let out a long breath. The tension melted out of her shoulders. Her fake sweet mother routine returned instantly. "I knew you would do the right thing, Casima. We are a family. We look out for each other." She did not thank me. She just turned away and started pouring herself a glass of sparkling water. I walked out of the apartment. I got into my old sedan and gripped the steering wheel. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Brenda thought she had just bullied me into submission. She had no idea she had just handed me the keys to her eventual destruction. I drove straight to the downtown financial district. I parked in the underground garage of a sleek glass high-rise and took the private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to my corporate office. Silver letters on the slate wall read, "White Holdings, LLC." My executive assistant met me in the hallway. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," I told him as I walked past. "Get our lead corporate attorney on the line. I need a contract drafted immediately." 5 minutes later, my lawyer Marcus sat across from my heavy oak desk. I handed him the venue brochure Brenda had shoved into my hands a week prior. "The Black Hills Estate," Marcus read. The name carried heavy weight in South Dakota. It was the most exclusive property in the state: historic stone architecture, sprawling manicured gardens, and a grand ballroom that catered only to elite political donors and generational wealth. "I need to pay a $25,000 deposit to secure a date there," I explained. "But I am not writing a personal check. I want the payment wired directly from the primary operating account of White Holdings, LLC. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are we hosting a corporate retreat?" "No," I said. "We are hosting a wedding." I leaned forward and folded my hands on the polished wood. "Listen carefully, Marcus. I want White Holdings, LLC listed as the sole client on the master venue contract. I want all cancellation rights execution policies and vendor access protocols assigned exclusively to my holding company. I want a strict clause stating that no other individual can alter the event details without the direct written authorization of the LLC manager, which is me." Marcus nodded, his pen scratching across a legal pad. "The venue will not care who pays, as long as the funds clear. But this means you legally own the event, Casima. If anyone tries to change the catering or the guest list or the schedule, the estate management will legally have to deny them and call you." That is exactly the point I said. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, the wire transfer was complete. The venue coordinator emailed the countersigned agreements. White Holdings, LLC officially held the master contract for Tiffany's dream wedding. I printed the documents and read every single line. Clause 4 granted me the right to cancel the event at any time. Clause 7 allowed me to ban any guest from the premises. I folded the heavy parchment paper and locked it inside the bottom drawer of my desk. I was buying a front row seat to their collapse. The price of admission was $25,000, and it was worth every single penny. I now controlled the stage. If Brenda pushed me too far, I could pull the plug on the entire event with one phone call, and there was nothing she could do to stop me. At 3 o'clock, my cell phone rang. It was Brenda. "Did you drop off the check?" she asked. Her voice was sharp again. The Sweet Mother Act always expired fast. "The venue has the funds," I replied. "The date is locked in." "Good. Now call them back and make sure the receipt is mailed to my home address. I need the paperwork in my name so I can coordinate the floral deliveries next month. I cannot have them calling a receptionist every time there is a question about the centerpieces." I looked at the locked drawer of my desk. "That is not possible," I said calmly. "Excuse me?" Brenda snapped. "The venue handles all communications digitally now." I lied smoothly. "They will email the updates to a secure portal. I will forward you whatever you need. Do not worry, Mom. I am handling the administrative work exactly like you asked." Brenda huffed in frustration over the phone. "Fine. Just make sure you do not mess this up, Casima. Tiffany is marrying into a very important situation. We cannot afford any mistakes." I paused. She loved bringing up the groom, but she always kept his details vague. "You keep saying that I said, but you have not even told me the groom's last name. I need his full name to finish addressing the final batch of secondary invitations tonight." A long sigh echoed through the phone speaker. Brenda loved dragging out dramatic moments. She wanted me to feel small. "His name is Trent," Brenda gloated. "Trent Sterling. His family owns Sterling Logistics." I stopped breathing. The pen I was holding slipped out of my fingers and clattered onto the hardwood desk. "Are you still there?" Brenda asked. "Yes," I managed to say. "Did you say Sterling?" "Yes, Casima. They practically own the agricultural shipping routes for the entire Midwest. Tiffany is marrying into a dynasty. This is why everything must be flawless. Do you understand the level of wealth we are dealing with now?" I understood far better than she did. "I will make sure the invitations are perfect," I told her. I hung up the phone. I sat in my silent office and stared at the city skyline outside my window. The name echoed in my mind like a warning bell. I had never met Trent, but I knew his family intimate details. The universe had just handed me the ultimate ace, and I kept it hidden right up my sleeve. The name hung in the quiet air of my office. Trent Sterling. I sat frozen in my leather chair. The pen I dropped lay still on the polished hardwood floor. My eyes darted to the locked filing cabinet standing in the far corner of the room. I did not need to open the heavy metal drawers to remember the contents hidden inside. 2 years ago, Sterling Logistics faced a crippling federal inquiry. The government raided their primary shipping hubs across 3 Midwestern states. Federal prosecutors prepared sweeping indictments for interstate commerce violations. The charges threatened to dismantle their generational shipping empire overnight. Harrison Sterling was staring down the barrel of a multi-year prison sentence. His legendary legal team panicked. The corporate board fractured into chaotic factions. In a desperate final move, Harrison fired his high-priced lawyers and hired my firm. I flew to Chicago on a chartered jet. I walked into a windowless boardroom high above the city skyline. Harrison Sterling sat at the head of a long glass table. He looked old. He looked entirely defeated. His wife Evelyn sat beside him. Her hands shook constantly as she gripped a heavy pearl necklace. They expected a team of seasoned men in expensive gray suits to walk through those double doors. Instead, they got me, a 27-year-old woman carrying a single black briefcase. I took control of that room in less than 5 minutes. I laid a 50-page restructuring plan on the glass table. I fired their corrupt logistics managers on the spot. I shielded their personal assets behind impenetrable blind trusts. Over the next 6 months, I negotiated directly with the ruthless federal prosecutors. I reduced a devastating criminal indictment to a manageable corporate fine. I spent half a year living in bleak hotel rooms, dissecting their broken supply chain, and rebuilding their empire from the ashes. On my final day in Chicago, Evelyn Sterling pulled me aside. Tears ruined her designer makeup. She grabbed my hands tight. She told me I saved their lives. Harrison shook my hand with genuine reverence. He offered me a permanent, lucrative seat on his executive board. I declined the offer. My crisis management contract mandated strict anonymity outside of secure corporate settings. My elite clients valued my discretion just as much as my strategy. The Sterlings knew me only as C. White, the ruthless fixer who rescued their legacy from the brink of total ruin. They never knew my full name. They had no idea I lived a quiet life in South Dakota. And they certainly possessed no clue that I shared DNA with a woman named Brenda. Now my spoiled younger sister was marrying their son. A harsh, buzzing sound interrupted my thoughts. The office intercom flashed with a red light. I pressed the silver button. "Your mother is on line 1, David said. His voice carried a distinct hint of warning. "She sounds highly agitated. She demanded I interrupt your workflow." I picked up the receiver. Cosima, Brenda barked, before I could even say hello. "You need to come to the house immediately. The Sterlings just sent over their VIP guest list for the reception. The formatting on the document is a total disaster. You need to log these names into our master database tonight. And please comb your hair. We have a prestigious caterer coming over for a private tasting. I refuse to let you look like a vagrant in front of the pastry chef." "I will be there in 20 minutes, I replied. I placed the phone back on the receiver. I packed my cheap laptop into my worn canvas bag. A strange, cold energy settled deep into my chest. The chessboard was set. My mother was inviting the king directly into my territory, oblivious to the fact that I already owned the board. I drove to the suburbs and parked my old sedan behind Tiffany's shiny European sports car. I walked through the heavy front doors. The house smelled of expensive vanilla candles and roasted garlic. Brenda stood in the kitchen, wearing a tailored silk blouse. Tiffany sat at the expansive dining table, typing furiously on her newest smartphone. Brenda pointed a manicured finger toward a small silver flash drive resting on the granite counter. "That holds the Sterling family guest list," Brenda commanded. "Plug it in. Start typing. These are senators, district judges, and corporate executives. Real money, Cosima. Spell their titles correctly. Do not embarrass us." I pulled out my laptop plugged in the drive and opened the spreadsheet. I scrolled through the names. I recognized half of them. I had audited their financial portfolios during the logistics crisis. Brenda poured a glass of crisp white wine and handed it to Tiffany. "Evelyn Sterling is a queen," Brenda gushed. She sighed, looking up at the vaulted ceiling. "She has such refined old money taste. I am terrified to host her for the rehearsal dinner next month. She expects flawless execution. Cosima, you will stay in the background when the Sterlings arrive for the wedding week. Do not speak to them unless spoken to. I do not want Harrison thinking we come from a low-class background." I kept my eyes fixed on the glowing screen. The irony tasted metallic and sharp in my mouth. Brenda worshipped the ground Evelyn walked on. Yet I clearly remembered Evelyn sobbing in that Chicago boardroom, pleading with me to keep her husband out of a federal penitentiary. Now my mother was explicitly ordering me to hide in the shadows because I was supposedly unfit to breathe the same air as the Sterling family. Can you imagine Cosima trying to hold a conversation with Harrison Sterling? Tiffany laughed. She took a sip of her wine and smirked. He would probably mistake her for a janitor. She does not even know how to properly pronounce their favorite champagne brand. I pressed the enter key. The final name locked into the database. I saved the file and closed the laptop. "I will make sure to stay out of his way," I said quietly. I kept my face an unreadable mask. "Good," Brenda snapped. She set her empty wine glass in the stainless steel sink. Now we need to discuss your attire. Tiffany decided to have 5 bridesmaids, her former sorority sisters. You are going to be the 6th bridesmaid. I looked up, genuinely surprised. You told me I did not fit the aesthetic. You do not, Tiffany groaned. She rolled her eyes dramatically. But Trent insists on family participation. He is very traditional and stubborn about family values. He said it would look terrible to his relatives if my only sister was excluded from the altar. It is a horrible idea, but we have to appease the groom. I cannot risk him getting cold feet over something so stupid. You are going to ruin the professional photos, Brenda added. She crossed her arms and glared at me. But we will manage the visual damage. I ordered you a custom silk gown. It is a dark, muted tone, so you will blend into the background behind the beautiful girls. It cost $800. You will pay me back by Friday, obviously. It arrives next week. You better not destroy it. I looked at the two of them. They were so consumed by their own vanity and greed, they failed to realize they were building an inescapable trap for themselves. They wanted me in the bridal party solely to satisfy Trent. They wanted me to pay for an overpriced dress just to stand in the shadows and serve as an ugly prop to make Tiffany look better. They wanted to strip away every ounce of my dignity before the big day. I will transfer the funds for the dress tomorrow morning, I said. I picked up my canvas bag and slung it over my shoulder. See you next week for the fitting. Tiffany smirked without looking up from her phone. Try to look somewhat presentable. I walked out the front door and stepped into the cool evening air. I did not care about an $800 dress. I did not care about their petty insults. I cared about the inevitable collision. When Harrison Sterling walked into that wedding reception and saw his corporate savior standing in the corner taking orders from a tyrant, the fallout would shatter Brenda's illusion forever. I just had to bide my time. But Brenda and Tiffany were not finished trying to break my spirit. As I started my car engine, I had no idea they were already plotting a cruel, physical sabotage to humiliate me before the wedding week even began. 3 months before the wedding ceremony, the casual psychological games turned into deliberate physical sabotage. I had transferred $800 for the custom bridesmaid gown directly to Brenda. She insisted on handling the transaction herself to ensure I did not buy a cheap knockoff from a discount website. The dress was a dark, muted charcoal color. Brenda specifically selected that shade so I would fade into the background, while Tiffany and her 5 sorority sisters were assigned vibrant, blush pink silk. I drove to my mother's house on a Thursday afternoon for the final fitting. The South Dakota sky was gray, threatening an early spring storm. I carried a pair of basic nude heels in my canvas work bag. I parked my old sedan behind Tiffany's shiny sports car, walked up the driveway, and pushed the heavy front door open. A sharp chemical odor immediately burned the inside of my nose. The unmistakable smell of industrial bleach hung thick in the warm air of the foyer. I walked down the hallway toward the guest bedroom. Brenda had converted the space into a makeshift wardrobe and staging area for the bridal party. 6 garment bags hung from a heavy metal clothing rack. 5 of them were pristine. They were covered in clear protective plastic, holding the beautiful pink dresses for the chosen friends. The 6th bag, shoved into the far corner near a dusty window, was unzipped. I walked over and pulled the dark fabric out into the light. The $800 charcoal silk was ruined. A large, jagged white stain crept up the entire front panel of the skirt. The harsh chemical had eaten through the delicate material, leaving frayed edges and a crusty, chalky residue that crumbled when I touched it. I traced the pattern of the stain with my index finger. Liquid drops do not splash upward in a perfect, targeted arc from a dropped bottle. This bleach had been poured directly onto the waistline. It was a calculated act of destruction. Footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor behind me. I turned around. Tiffany stood in the doorway holding a half-empty bottle of expensive sparkling water. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt and a matching visor. Brenda stood right behind, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Oh no," Tiffany gasped. She placed a manicured hand over her mouth, but her eyes danced with obvious amusement. The cleaning lady was mopping the baseboards earlier today. She must have bumped into the rack and spilled her bucket. "I am so sorry, Cosima." Her voice dripped with fake sympathy. I kept my face perfectly still. We do not employ a cleaning lady who uses industrial bleach on hardwood floors. I knew it. They knew it. I looked at Brenda. She did not even pretend to look apologetic. "Well, you clearly cannot wear that down the aisle." Brenda sighed. She walked over, swatted my hand away, and flicked the ruined silk with her fingernail. "You would ruin the aesthetic of the bridal party photos. The photographer charged us $10,000 for the day. I refuse to have a glowing white stain ruining the symmetry of the altar pictures." "I can take it to a professional tailor," I offered, testing their true intentions. "Perhaps they can dye the fabric darker, or replace the front panel before the big day. I am sure we can salvage the $800. "Do not bother Tiffany," interjected quickly. She took a sip of her water. "It is bad luck to wear ruined clothes in a wedding. Besides, the charcoal color washed out your complexion anyway." Brenda waved her hand dismissively, sealing the trap they had set for me. "We do not have time to order a replacement from the designer. Just wear a plain black shift dress. You probably have an old one in your closet already. You can stand near the edge of the bridal party during the short ceremony and then blend in with the catering staff during the reception." Brenda adjusted her diamond necklace and smiled a thin, cruel smile. "It is better this way, Cosima. You will not feel pressured to mingle with the high-profile guests, and Tiffany will not have to worry about you looking out of place among her friends." They wanted me to look like a servant. They orchestrated this entire disaster to strip away my dignity so Tiffany could shine brighter in front of Trent Sterling. They needed a maid, not a sister. I looked at the ruined silk again. Any other woman would have screamed. Any normal sibling would have thrown the dress on the floor, demanded their money back, and walked out the front door forever. But I was not a normal sibling. I was a corporate strategist who specialized in destroying arrogant people. I let a small, calm smile touch the corners of my mouth. I nodded my head. "A plain black dress it is," I said. I folded the ruined gown, placed it gently over a chair, and walked out of the guest room without another word. I left the neighborhood and drove to a uniform supply store on the edge of town. It was a shop that sold scrubs to nurses and uniforms to restaurant workers. I walked down the fluorescent-lit aisles until I found the hospitality section. I picked out a $20 black shift dress. It was made of stiff polyester. It had no shape, no style, and no elegance. It was the exact uniform worn by banquet servers at mid-level hotels. I took it to the cash register and paid with a single $20 bill. I carried the cheap plastic shopping bag out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and laughed quietly. My mother had stolen $800 from me just to force me into a $20 maid outfit. She thought she was erasing my presence. She did not realize she was setting a visual trap that would detonate the second Harrison Sterling walked into the reception. When a billionaire realizes his peers are treating his corporate savior like the hired help, the social fallout is catastrophic. The weeks ticked down. I continued my double life. During the day, I authorized multi-million-dollar asset transfers for White Holdings. I advised tech executives on corporate severance packages. I commanded boardrooms with a single glance. At night, I played the obedient, invisible servant for my family. Brenda sent me endless spreadsheets. I negotiated lower rates with the local florists. I managed the massive seating charts. I made sure every single Sterling family member was placed at the best tables with unobstructed views of the grand ballroom floor. I wanted them to have a perfect view of the impending disaster. Finally, the day before the wedding arrived. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock at an exclusive chop house downtown. I was sitting in my corner office, reviewing a merger document, when my cell phone rang. "Do not forget to assemble the VIP gift bags tonight," Brenda ordered over the phone. "Tiffany bought custom engraved champagne flutes for the Sterling relatives. You need to put them in the velvet bags, tie the silver ribbons, and carry them to the chop house by 6:30. I looked at the clock on my wall. "Will I have a seat at the dinner?" I asked smoothly. Brenda scoffed loudly. "Of course not. It is an intimate dinner for the immediate families. We are at max capacity. Just drop the boxes off at the private dining room and wait in the back near the kitchen until we need you to hand them out. Do not wear anything flashy. Wear that black dress we agreed on. I do not want Harrison Sterling getting distracted by the hired help." I hung up the phone. I looked at the black polyester uniform hanging on the back of my office door. The king was arriving for dinner, and my mother was about to lock me out of the castle. She had no idea I held the deed to the entire kingdom. I pulled my old sedan into the alleyway behind the downtown chop house. The valet station at the front entrance was crowded with imported luxury cars. I did not belong at the front door. I parked near the dumpsters, turned off the engine, and grabbed the 2 heavy cardboard boxes from my back seat. Inside those boxes sat 40 custom velvet gift bags. I spent 4 hours assembling them on my living room floor. Tiffany demanded perfection. Each bag contained a crystal champagne flute engraved with the Sterling family crest, a miniature bottle of vintage wine, and a handwritten welcome note. My fingers were cramped from tying silver ribbons. I stepped out of the car. The evening air felt sharp and cold. I wore the cheap black polyester dress I bought at the uniform supply store. The fabric scratched against my skin. It offered zero warmth. I pushed the heavy metal service door open and walked down the narrow fluorescent-lit hallway toward the private dining room. The chop house was legendary in our city. It smelled of seared ribeye, aged leather, and expensive bourbon. I turned a corner and reached the entrance to the reserved banquet space. Warm, golden light spilled out into the hallway. I heard the low hum of wealthy voices and the soft clink of fine silverware. I shifted the heavy boxes in my arms and took a step forward. "Stop right there," a harsh voice commanded. Brenda stepped out of the dining room, blocking the entrance. She wore a tailored emerald gown. Diamonds glittered at her throat. Her eyes scanned my cheap black dress, and a cruel, satisfied smile spread across her face. "You actually wore it?" Brenda whispered. "Good. You look exactly like the waitstaff. Now hand me the boxes." I extended the heavy cardboard toward her. She did not take them. She signaled a passing busboy to grab them from my arms. "Where is my seat?" I asked. My tone remained flat and unbothered. Brenda let out a short, mocking laugh. "Your seat. Cosima, look inside that room." I glanced past her shoulder. The private dining room looked stunning. Long mahogany tables were decorated with towering white floral centerpieces. Tiffany sat near the front, laughing loudly while holding a glass of wine. Next to her sat a handsome, clean-cut young man. Trent Sterling. He looked polite and oblivious to the true nature of the woman he was about to marry. "There is no room at the family tables for you," Brenda hissed. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. "This is an intimate dinner for the inner circle. The Sterlings are sitting right across from Tiffany. I refuse to let them see my eldest daughter wearing a $20 uniform. You are just here to work anyway." She reached out, placed her palm flat against my shoulder, and shoved me backward. The physical push lacked any real strength, but the intent carried immense disrespect. "Take your food in the kitchen with the staff," Brenda ordered. "Do not come out unless I send someone to fetch you." She turned around and walked back into the golden light of the dining room. I did not argue. I did not cause a scene. I simply adjusted my posture, turned to my left, and pushed through the heavy wooden swinging doors into the commercial kitchen. The contrast hit me instantly. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of screaming chefs, clattering plates, and sizzling grills. The air felt thick with heat and the smell of industrial dish soap. Waiters rushed past me carrying heavy trays of prime rib and lobster tails. I found an empty metal stool tucked in a dark corner near the industrial dishwashers. I sat down. The stiff polyester of my dress hitched up at the knees. A kind line cook noticed me sitting there. He placed a small white plate on the stainless steel prep table next to my stool. It was a simple house salad. Iceberg lettuce, 3 cherry tomatoes, and no dressing. I picked up a plastic fork and ate my cold salad. Just a few miles away, my corporate name sat on legal documents controlling millions of dollars in regional assets. I could buy this entire restaurant with one phone call. Yet here I sat eating scraps in a hot kitchen because my mother needed me to feel worthless. I chewed the dry lettuce and watched the dining room through the small, round glass window of the swinging doors. The dinner progressed. Waiters brought out expensive bottles of red wine. Brenda stood up and gave a toast, praising the union of 2 incredible families. She played the part of the sophisticated matriarch flawlessly. Tiffany smiled and kissed Trent on the cheek. Then, my eyes shifted to the head of the table. Harrison Sterling sat in a high-backed leather chair. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit. Even sitting down, he radiated quiet, undeniable power. He did not laugh loudly. He did not make grand gestures. He simply observed the room with the sharp, calculating eyes of a man who built an empire from the ground up. Evelyn Sterling sat next to him. She looked elegant and composed, wearing a simple pearl necklace. The exact same necklace she wore the day I saved her husband from a federal indictment. My heart maintained a steady, even rhythm. The moment of impact was drawing near. Through the glass porthole, I watched Harrison stand up. He buttoned his suit jacket and began walking around the perimeter of the room, shaking hands with the guests. He exchanged brief, polite words with Tiffany's sorority sisters. He nodded at Brenda. Then Harrison turned his body toward the kitchen doors. He was looking for a waiter to request another glass of water. He took a step forward. His gaze swept over the swinging wooden doors, and then he stopped. Through the small glass window, his eyes met mine. I sat perfectly still on my metal stool. I did not look away. I did not hide my face. Harrison froze. The polite, social smile vanished from his face. His gray eyes narrowed. I saw the exact second his brain registered my features. He remembered the Chicago boardroom. He remembered the ruthless 27-year-old crisis manager who fired his corrupt executives and dismantled the federal prosecution. But the context shattered his logic. Why was the brilliant, terrifying corporate savior named C. White sitting on a broken stool in a sweaty restaurant kitchen? Why was she wearing a cheap polyester uniform? Harrison took another step toward the doors. His brow furrowed in deep confusion. He opened his mouth to speak. He raised his hand, reaching for the brass handle of the kitchen door. Brenda noticed him moving. She practically sprinted across the dining room floor. She intercepted Harrison just 2 feet away from the swinging doors. She inserted herself directly into his line of sight, blocking his view of the glass porthole. Brenda laughed. Her voice sounded breathless and frantic. "Are you looking for the restroom? It is down the hall to the left. Let me show you the way." Harrison looked at Brenda. He pointed a finger toward the kitchen doors. "Who is that woman back there?" Harrison asked. His voice carried a low, rumbling authority. Brenda did not even turn around to look. She waved her manicured hand in the air, dismissing the question with practiced ease. "Oh, do not mind the help," Brenda said loudly. "It is just one of the catering staff. They are taking their break. Come back to the table, Harrison. The chef is about to carve the main course." Harrison stood his ground for 3 long seconds. He looked at Brenda. He looked back at the small glass window. I sat in the shadows, my face partially obscured by the glare of the kitchen lights. The billionaire patriarch was no fool. He built a logistics dynasty by trusting his instincts. He knew he recognized me. He knew the woman sitting next to the dishwashers was not a minimum wage server. But social protocol demanded he return to the dinner. Harrison gave a stiff nod. He turned around and walked back to his leather chair. I watched him sit down. He did not touch his prime rib. He did not laugh at Tiffany's jokes. He sat in silence, his eyes darting back toward the kitchen doors every few minutes. The seed of suspicion was firmly planted in his mind. He knew something was deeply wrong with this picture, and a man like Harrison Sterling never ignored a puzzle. Brenda thought she had successfully diverted his attention. She returned to her seat, drinking her wine and basking in her perceived victory. She believed she had kept the ugly, embarrassing daughter hidden from the kings of South Dakota. She had no idea she just guaranteed her own destruction. I finished my cold salad. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles out of my stiff black dress, and walked out the back door of the kitchen. The freezing night air hit my face. I walked toward my car, leaving the sounds of clinking glass and fake laughter behind me. Tomorrow was the wedding day. The trap was set. The legal documents were locked in my office, the groom's family was already suspicious, and my mother and sister were preparing to unleash their final, most brutal humiliation against me. They wanted me to scrub the dirt off their shoes before the ceremony. They wanted me to stand in the back like a discarded piece of trash. I turned the key in my ignition. The engine roared to life. Let them hand me the rag. Let them force me into the corner. Because tomorrow, when the sun set over the Black Hills estate, I was going to burn their fake empire straight to the ground. The sun rose over the Black Hills estate. The morning air was crisp, but inside the sprawling bridal suite, the atmosphere felt toxic. I walked through the double oak doors, carrying 3 heavy garment bags over my shoulder. My mother and sister had forced me to load their luggage into my old sedan at dawn. I wore the same stiff black polyester uniform from the night before. I had washed it in my apartment sink and hung it over a chair to dry. The bridal suite smelled of expensive champagne hairspray and fresh lilies. Tiffany lounged on a white leather sofa. She wore a custom pink silk robe with the word bride embroidered in silver thread across the back. Her 5 chosen friends surrounded her, wearing matching robes, clinking crystal glasses filled with mimosas. Brenda stood near the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting her emerald earrings. She spotted me struggling with the heavy bags. "Do not drag that canvas across the hardwood," Brenda snapped. Her voice cut through the giggles of the bridesmaids. "Put those down and get into the back room. The dresses need steaming, all 7 of them, and do not come out until there is not a single wrinkle left." She pointed toward a narrow door near the ensuite bathroom. It was a utility closet. It had no windows and 0 ventilation. I did not argue. I carried the bags into the small room and shut the door. I plugged in the heavy industrial steamer. Within 5 minutes, the tiny space turned into a sauna. Sweat pooled at the base of my neck. The cheap fabric of my uniform clung to my skin. I stood in the sweltering heat, running the hot steam wand over layers of delicate chiffon and heavy satin. This was a masterclass in humiliation. Brenda wanted to break my spirit before the sun even reached its peak. I thought about my corner office in downtown Sioux Falls. I thought about the climate-controlled boardroom where I sat at the head of the table, making decisions that shifted the regional economy. I held the power to bankrupt every person laughing in the next room. Yet here I stood, sweating in a closet pressing their clothes. The contrast did not make me angry, it made my focus sharper. It took an hour to finish the task. My arms ached. I opened the door and pushed the heavy metal clothing rack out into the main suite. The room was buzzing. 2 professional makeup artists and a hairstylist were hovering around Tiffany. She sat in a high chair examining her face in a handheld mirror. I parked the rack near the wall. I planned to slip out the door and find a quiet corner of the estate grounds to wait. "Cosima, wait!" Tiffany barked. I stopped. I turned around. Tiffany kicked her foot out. She was wearing a pair of white designer heels. She had walked out onto the damp grass earlier that morning for a quick photo session with the photographer. A small smudge of brown mud stained the side of the pristine white leather. She reached down, unbuckled the shoes, and picked them up. She did not hand them to me. She threw them. The heavy designer heels sailed through the air and struck me directly in the center of my chest. The sharp stiletto heel dug into my collarbone. I flinched, catching them before they hit the hardwood floor. "Scrub the mud off, Cosima," Tiffany sneered. "Make yourself useful for once today." The entire suite went dead silent. The hairstylist froze with a curling iron suspended in the air. The makeup artist slowly lowered her brush. These hired professionals stared at Tiffany in pure shock. They had seen demanding brides before, but treating a sibling like a stray dog was a different level of cruelty. Tiffany did not care about their silent judgment. She turned to her maid of honor and laughed out loud. "She is like Cinderella," Tiffany whispered, making sure her voice was loud enough for every single person in the room to hear. "Except she has no fairy godmother, and she definitely does not have the looks." The bridesmaids erupted into manufactured giggles. Brenda took a slow sip of her mimosa and smiled. She loved watching Tiffany assert dominance. "Well, someone has to do the dirty work," Brenda chimed in. "It builds character." I stood near the door. My collarbone throbbed where the shoe had struck me. I looked down at the white leather in my hands. I felt the eyes of the makeup artist burning into the side of my face with deep, uncomfortable pity. They expected me to burst into tears. They expected me to throw the shoes back and run out of the room. I felt no anger. I felt only a cold, calculating calm spreading through my veins. The timer had reached 0. I walked over to the bathroom sink. I wet a small washcloth with warm water. I crouched down near the counter and methodically wiped the mud away from the expensive leather. I dried the shoes with a clean towel. While their backs were turned, I reached into the deep pocket of my canvas bag. I pulled out my encrypted smartphone. I needed to launch the first strike. Brenda owned a high-end fashion boutique in the upscale shopping district of Sioux Falls. It was a vanity project. She used it to pretend she was a successful businesswoman. In reality, the boutique bled money every single month. She funded her inventory with high-interest commercial loans. 3 weeks prior, her primary lender prepared to call in the debt and seize the property. They never got the chance. White Holdings, LLC, swooped in through a silent shell company. My firm purchased Brenda's distressed debt for pennies on the dollar. I literally owned my mother's business. I held the mortgage. I held the credit lines. I held her entire fake empire in the palm of my hand. I opened my secure email application. I drafted a single direct message to Marcus, my lead corporate attorney. "Execute the default clauses on the retail portfolio," I typed. "Freeze all commercial credit lines immediately. Notify her bank." I hit send. The digital dominoes were now perfectly lined up. I just needed Tiffany to flick the first one at the reception. The financial triggers would take a few hours to process through the banking system. The timing would be flawless. By the time Brenda sat down to eat her overpriced steak dinner, her entire financial existence would be erased. I slipped the phone back into my bag. I picked up the pristine white heels. I walked back to the center of the room. The makeup artists held their breath. I handed the shoes back to Tiffany. "Here you go," I said. My voice was smooth, polite, and entirely unbothered. Tiffany snatched the shoes from my hands. She frowned, clearly unsettled by my lack of emotional reaction. She wanted tears. She wanted a fight. My calm compliance unnerved her. I smiled at her. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. Brenda stepped forward, eager to break the strange tension I had just created. "Get out of here, Cosima," Brenda ordered, pointing toward the heavy oak doors. "We need to do the bridal portraits. You are ruining the lighting. Go wait by the service exit near the Grand Lawn. Do not mingle with the early arrivals. I will come find you when it is time to line up for the ceremony procession." I nodded once. I turned around and walked out of the bridal suite. The heavy doors clicked shut behind me, cutting off their laughter. I walked down the carpeted hallway of the estate. My chest still ached from the impact of the shoe, but my mind was soaring. They thought they had just banished the ugly sister to the shadows. They had no idea they had just ordered the executioner to take her position. The morning humiliation was over, but as I walked out toward the Grand Lawn, the true test of my patience was waiting. Brenda was about to orchestrate the most public exclusion of my life, right in front of Harrison Sterling, unaware that she was tightening the noose around her own neck. I walked out of the estate manor and stepped onto the sprawling green lawn. The afternoon sun beat down on the manicured grass. A classical string quartet played softly in the background. White wooden chairs were arranged in perfect symmetrical rows, facing a stunning floral archway. The guests were already taking their seats. I recognized local politicians, wealthy cattle ranchers, and prominent business owners. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh blooming roses. I stood near the staging area, behind a row of tall hedges. This was the designated gathering spot for the bridal party. As the sister of the bride protocol dictated, I should be standing in the family procession line. I should have been preparing to walk down the aisle before the groomsmen. I waited silently in my stiff black polyester dress. The fabric trapped the summer heat against my skin. Brenda marched around the corner of the hedge. Her emerald gown caught the sunlight. She carried a clipboard and wore a headset playing the role of the stressed elite mother of the bride. She spotted me standing near the other bridesmaids. The girls in their blush pink silk dresses were giggling and taking photos. I stood a few feet away, blending into the shadows of the tall bushes. Brenda did not speak. She closed the distance between us in 3 rapid strides. She reached out and grabbed my upper arm. Her grip was tight. Her manicured fingernails dug sharply into my bare skin. I did not flinch. I let her pull me away from the group. She dragged me behind a large stone fountain out of sight from the other girls. "You are not sitting in the front pews," Brenda hissed. Her voice was a low, venomous whisper. She kept her fake smile plastered on her face, just in case a guest walked past. I looked down at her hand, gripping my arm. "You told Trent I would be in the procession," I reminded her. My tone remained flat. "Trent is inside the manor waiting for the music to change," Brenda snapped. "He will not see the order of the procession. The Sterling family is sitting in the very front row. The governor is sitting right behind them. I will not have you embarrassing us, looking like a mortician." She shoved me backward. I stumbled slightly but caught my balance. "Stand in the back by the exit," Brenda commanded. "Do not sit down. Do not talk to the ushers. Just stand there and pretend you are part of the venue staff. When the ceremony is over, go straight to the ballroom and wait in the kitchen." She turned around and hurried back to her beautiful, chosen daughters. I rubbed my arm. Red crescent marks faded slowly from my skin. I did not feel sad. I felt a profound sense of clarity. Every cruel action she took was another nail she hammered into her own coffin. I walked the long way around the perimeter of the lawn. I avoided the main center aisle. I kept my head down and navigated the outer edges of the seating area. I reached the very back row. I found a spot near a large oak tree far away from the velvet ropes and the floral arrangements. A young waiter stood a few feet away from me. He wore a black uniform identical to mine. He held a silver tray filled with ice water glasses for the guests. He offered me a sympathetic nod, assuming I was a coworker assigned to door duty. I nodded back. The music shifted. The string quartet began playing a traditional wedding march. The crowd stood up. The procession began. I watched from the back of the lawn. Trent Sterling walked down the aisle first. He looked handsome in a custom tuxedo. He stood at the altar and folded his hands. I studied his face from a distance. Trent was a good man. He came from generational wealth, but he lacked the cutthroat edge his father possessed. He was raised in a sheltered environment where family loyalty was paramount. He trusted people easily. He had opened a heavy door for a busboy earlier that morning. That small gesture proved his character. It also made Tiffany's deception infinitely worse. She targeted him for his trust fund. She manipulated his traditional values. She played the role of a sweet, innocent local girl who just wanted a simple life. Trent looked down the aisle with complete adoration in his eyes. He had no idea he was marrying a monster. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle next. They smiled and waved at the prominent guests. Then the music swelled. Tiffany appeared at the start of the white runner. Brenda walked beside her, acting as the proud, emotional mother. Tiffany wore a designer gown that cost more than my first car. She carried a bouquet of rare imported orchids. She looked angelic. She forced a single tear to roll down her cheek as she locked eyes with Trent. A collective sigh echoed through the wealthy crowd. They bought the performance. They saw a perfect family. My eyes moved away from the altar. I scanned the front row of the audience. Harrison Sterling sat tall and rigid in his seat. He wore a dark navy suit. He did not smile. He observed the ceremony with the sharp, calculating gaze of a predator surveying a new territory. He noticed the slight hesitation of the officiant. He noticed the nervous twitch in Brenda's hands. Harrison was a man who dissected human behavior for a living. Evelyn Sterling sat beside him. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She leaned over and whispered something to Harrison. He gave a short nod. They radiated quiet power and untouchable old money. They believed they were welcoming a graceful, loving daughter into their highly protected inner circle. They were actually adopting a parasite. I stood next to the waiter and let out a slow breath. The officiant began speaking. He talked about honesty, honor, and the sacred bond of trust. Every single word spoken over the microphone felt like a hollow joke. Tiffany recited her vows. Her voice trembled with fake emotion. She promised to cherish Trent in sickness and in health. She promised to be faithful, true, and transparent. Brenda stood in the front row, beaming with intense pride. She had successfully secured her retirement plan. She believed Tiffany's new last name would shield their family from any financial consequences. She thought the Sterling wealth would pay off her secret debts and elevate her social standing permanently. The hypocrisy hung thick in the warm summer air. I reached down and grabbed the cuff of my cheap polyester sleeve. I slid the rough fabric upward, exposing my left wrist. A gold Cartier watch rested against my skin. It was a rare, vintage timepiece. I bought it for myself after I successfully orchestrated a billion-dollar merger for a tech giant in Seattle. The watch cost more than the entire wedding venue deposit. It represented my invisible empire. I checked the time. The thin gold hands pointed to exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The financial markets were officially closed for the weekend. The automated banking wires were done processing. The secure email I sent to my corporate attorney had successfully triggered the default clauses on Brenda's retail portfolio. The banks had frozen her credit lines. The foreclosure notices were actively generating in the system. The traps were armed. The countdown was over. The destruction of Brenda's fake empire was no longer a plan. It was a mathematical certainty. I slid the cheap sleeve back down, hiding the gold watch in the shadows. "You may now kiss the bride," the officiant announced. Trent leaned in. and kissed Tiffany. The crowd erupted into polite applause. The string quartet played a joyful, upbeat melody. The newlyweds turned around and began their triumphant walk back up the aisle. Tiffany smiled and waved at the cheering guests. As she passed the back rows, her eyes swept over the catering staff. She looked right through me. She did not even register my presence. I was a ghost in a uniform. Brenda followed close behind them. She spotted me standing by the oak tree. She shot me a severe warning glare. She pointed a sharp finger toward the manor, silently ordering me to disappear before the guests began mingling. I did not move until the family cleared the lawn. The guests stood up and began talking. The sound of wealthy laughter filled the air. They moved slowly across the grass, heading toward the grand ballroom for the evening reception. Waiters began clearing the white chairs. I turned my back on the empty altar. I walked toward the heavy glass doors of the estate manor. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline course through my chest. The morning humiliation was finished. The fake vows were spoken. It was time for the reception. The final battlefield was waiting. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out of the summer heat into the air-conditioned chill of the estate manor. The grand ballroom was a cavern of extreme wealth. Vaulted ceilings stretched high above. 3 massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the space. 180 guests were finding their assigned seats at round tables draped in pristine white silk. I walked past the velvet ropes and navigated the outer edges of the room. I kept my head down. I positioned myself in the deep shadows near the kitchen doors. This was exactly where Brenda ordered me to stay. A catering manager rushed past me holding a metal clipboard. He wore a crisp tuxedo. He looked at my cheap black polyester uniform and pointed toward a nearby service station. "Grab those water pitchers and start filling glasses at table 4, he ordered. He thought I was a temporary hire. I did not correct him. I picked up a heavy silver pitcher. I walked out onto the ballroom floor. I poured ice water for local politicians, corporate attorneys, and wealthy cattle ranchers. I served the very people I could bankrupt with a single phone call. The irony fueled my cold focus. I filled their glasses, offered a polite nod, and retreated back to the shadows near the swinging kitchen doors. I stood still and observed the room. I watched the head table. Trent Sterling sat next to Tiffany. He looked incredibly happy. He chatted with his groomsmen and held Tiffany by the hand. He believed he had just married the woman of his dreams. He had no idea the sweet, innocent local girl was a carefully crafted illusion. Harrison and Evelyn sat at a VIP table located directly next to the polished wood dance floor. Evelyn smiled and engaged in polite conversation with the governor. Harrison was different. He was not smiling. He rested his chin on his folded hands. His sharp gray eyes scanned the perimeter of the ballroom. He was a man who hated puzzles he could not solve. He was still thinking about the woman in the kitchen from the rehearsal dinner. He knew my face. He just needed the final piece of context to snap the picture into focus. Waiters flooded the room, carrying plates of prime rib and roasted asparagus. The dinner service began. Brenda floated between the tables, holding a crystal wine glass. She laughed loudly. She touched the shoulders of influential guests. She was soaking in her fake victory. She played the role of the sophisticated matriarch to absolute perfection. She thought the Sterling family wealth was now her personal safety net. She thought Tiffany marrying into a dynasty erased all of her financial sins. She had no idea her high-end boutique was currently locked down by my legal team. She had no idea her commercial credit lines were frozen. She was dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, completely blind to the water rushing into the hull. The dinner plates were finally cleared. The overhead lights dimmed slightly. A bright spotlight hit the center of the dance floor. The dull roar of conversation quieted down. It was time for the toasts. The best man spoke first. He told a funny story about Trent in college. He praised Trent for his loyalty and his honest character. The crowd clapped warmly. Then, Tiffany stood up. She walked to the center of the dance floor. She grabbed a silver microphone from the stand. She smoothed the front of her designer wedding gown. She tapped the microphone twice. The harsh thump echoed through the ballroom speakers. She started her speech with fake tears. She thanked Trent. She called him her handsome prince and her protector. She looked directly at Evelyn and Harrison. She thanked them for welcoming a simple South Dakota girl into their incredible family. She laid the emotional manipulation on incredibly thick. The crowd offered supportive applause. Evelyn offered a polite, strained smile. Harrison simply gave a single, firm nod. Then Tiffany shifted her tone. The fake tears vanished. She thanked her bridesmaids. She talked about sisterhood and loyalty. And then she stopped talking. She stood in the center of the spotlight and scanned the dark perimeter of the room. She was looking for her real sister. She wanted one final moment of absolute dominance. She needed to crush me publicly to seal her triumph. She wanted to prove to herself that she was the undeniable winner of our family dynamic. Her eyes scanned the shadows. They found me standing by the kitchen doors. She raised her arm and pointed her finger directly at me. The spotlight did not move, but 180 heads turned to follow her gaze. The guests shifted in their chairs. They looked toward the back of the room. They saw a woman in a cheap black uniform standing next to a stack of dirty dinner plates. And a special thanks to Casima back there, Tiffany laughed. Her voice bounced off the crystal chandeliers and pierced the quiet room. She is just the maid, so ignore her. The room hesitated. The wealthy elite did not know how to react to such blatant cruelty disguised as a wedding joke. A few people chuckled nervously. The sound was scattered and uncomfortable. Trent shifted in his chair. He dropped his hand from the table. He frowned. He looked at Tiffany with genuine confusion. This was not the sweet, innocent woman he fell in love with. Traditional men who value family respect do not find public humiliation funny. Brenda could not resist the opportunity to join the attack. She wanted to twist the knife. She walked up behind Tiffany and leaned into the microphone. Her face was flushed with wine and sheer arrogance. "She serves, she does not shine," Brenda added maliciously. The laughter grew a bit louder this time. The crowd followed the cue of the mother of the bride. They assumed this was an inside family joke. They thought they had permission to mock the hired help. They chuckled and raised their glasses. Tiffany smirked. Brenda beamed with pride. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully reduced me to nothing in front of the most powerful people in the state. They stripped away my beautiful dress. They banned me from the family photos. They forced me to wipe mud off a shoe. And now they had publicly labeled me a servant in front of billionaires. They wanted me to drop my gaze. They expected me to look at the floor in shame. They wanted me to turn around and run out the back doors, crying. I did not look down. I stepped forward. I moved out of the deep shadows and into the dim, ambient light of the ballroom edge. I kept my posture straight. I kept my head high. I locked eyes with Tiffany across the massive room. The distance between us felt non-existent. I stared directly into her smug, arrogant face. And I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was a genuine, terrifying smile of complete and utter victory. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap snap shut. Tiffany saw my face. Her smirk faltered. Her hand tightened around the silver microphone. The psychological shift was immediate. She expected a victim. She saw an executioner. A flicker of real panic flashed in her eyes. She did not understand why the girl in the cheap black dress was smiling at her like a corporate titan. She was about to find out. The nervous laughter in the room began to fade. The silence grew heavy and expectant. I shifted my gaze away from my sister. I looked directly at the VIP table next to the dance floor. I looked at Harrison Sterling. The billionaire patriarch was no longer leaning on his hands. He was sitting bolt upright. He stared at me, the final puzzle piece locked into his brain. He heard my mother say my name. He heard her call me Cosima. He saw my face in the light. He finally realized that the woman wearing the $20 polyester uniform was the exact same woman who saved his entire family from federal prison. The scattered laughter in the ballroom died in a single heartbeat. It did not fade away slowly. It stopped flat. Harrison Sterling stood up. He did not rise politely to offer a toast. He pushed his heavy mahogany chair backward with sudden force. The wooden legs dragged across the polished dance floor. The harsh scrape echoed through the cavernous room like a gunshot. Evelyn Sterling stood up right beside him. Her hands flew to her chest, clutching her pearl necklace. Her eyes were wide-locked in the dark corner of the room where I stood. Every guest at the VIP tables froze. The state governor stopped talking mid-sentence. A prominent district judge lowered his wine glass slowly to the white tablecloth. 180 of the most influential people in South Dakota held their breath. They sensed an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The predator had just entered the room, and he was not looking at the bride. Harrison buttoned his tailored navy suit jacket. He stepped away from the head table. He ignored Tiffany entirely. He did not even cast a glance toward Brenda, who was still wearing her arrogant, victorious smirk. His sharp gray eyes remained fixed directly on me. He began to walk. He marched past the crystal-draped tables. He walked past the shocked faces of wealthy ranchers and corporate executives. The elite guests parted like the sea, pulling their chairs in to give the billionaire patriarch a clear path. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the steady, rhythmic click of his expensive leather shoes hitting the hardwood floor. I stood my ground near the swinging kitchen doors. I held a silver pitcher of ice water in my right hand. The cheap polyester fabric of my $20 uniform scratched against my skin. I did not shrink back into the shadows. I stepped forward, stepping directly into the ambient light. Harrison stopped 2 feet away from me. He looked at the pitcher in my hand. He looked at the ugly, shapeless black dress my mother forced me to wear. Then he looked at my face. The confusion in his eyes melted away, replaced by profound realization and deep gratitude. He extended his right hand toward me. Then, this titan of industry, a man who made state politicians tremble with a single phone call, bowed his head. It was not a quick, polite nod. It was a deep, undeniable dip of his chin. It was a public display of total submission and respect, Ms. White Harrison said. His voice rumbled through the quiet room. He did not use a microphone, yet his tone carried all the way back to the bridal table. I thought I saw you last night at the Chop House. We had no idea you were here today. Why on earth are you standing in the back near the kitchen? I set the water pitcher down on a nearby service tray. I reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. It is my assigned station, Harrison, I replied. My voice remained steady and clear. I am handling the administrative duties for the event. Before Harrison could respond, Evelyn pushed past a stunned waiter to reach me. She did not offer a formal handshake. She threw her arms around my neck and hugged me fierce and tight. The scent of her expensive perfume washed over me, erasing the smell of stale banquet food. Cosima, it is an incredible honor to see you again, Evelyn said. Her voice shook with genuine emotion. We owe you our lives. We have tried to contact your firm for months just to send a proper thank you gift. Why did you not tell us you were attending this wedding? I smiled and patted her shoulder gently. I like to keep a low profile, Evelyn. You know how much I value discretion. A collective gasp rippled through the seated crowd. The sound swept from the front tables all the way to the back of the room. The wealthiest business owners in the region sat in stunned disbelief. They just watched the undisputed kings of South Dakota embrace a banquet maid. They watched a billionaire bow to a woman holding a water pitcher. The social hierarchy of the room flipped upside down in a matter of seconds. On the dance floor, Tiffany stood frozen in the spotlight. Her manicured fingers went slack. The silver microphone slipped from her grip. It plummeted toward the hardwood floor. The impact produced a deafening screech of audio feedback. The sharp, painful noise caused several guests to wince and cover their ears. Tiffany did not flinch. She did not bend down to pick up the equipment. She just stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The smug, arrogant bride was gone, replaced by a terrified child who suddenly realized she had kicked a sleeping dragon. Brenda looked like someone had poured wet concrete into her veins. She stood paralyzed near the head table, her jaw hung open, stretching her face into a mask of pure horror. The crystal champagne flute in her hand tilted sideways. Expensive wine spilled over the rim, splashing onto her emerald gown. She did not even notice the dark, wet stains spreading across her silk dress. Her brain could not process the visual data. The daughter she spent 29 years treating like garbage was currently holding court with the most powerful family in the state. The ugly sister she forced to scrub mud off a shoe was being treated like royalty. Brenda had spent decades worshiping the Sterling family name, leveraging her own credit score just to breathe the same air as them. Now she was watching Harrison Sterling treat her discarded daughter as his superior. The psychological damage hitting my mother in that exact moment was worth far more than the $25,000 I paid to control the venue. I stood next to Evelyn and felt a profound sense of peace. For years, my mother told me I was a failure because I drove an old sedan and lived in a modest apartment. She believed human value was determined by designer labels and leased luxury vehicles. She built a life built entirely on debt and deceit. She forced me into a windowless closet to steam clothes while she drank mimosas. She dragged me out of the family procession line because she thought my presence would ruin her aesthetic. She never understood that true power does not need to announce itself. True power does not need a pink silk robe or a spotlight on a dance floor. True power wears a $20 dress and waits patiently in the shadows until the exact right moment to strike. Evelyn held my hand. Her fingers were warm. I looked at the diamond ring on her hand, a genuine family heirloom, and compared it to the flashy finance jewelry Brenda wore. The difference between old money and fake money was never more apparent than in this exact moment. Harrison Sterling did not care about the caterers or the floral arrangements. He cared about loyalty. He cared about the woman who saved his generational shipping routes from federal seizure. The guests began whispering. The low murmur of wealthy voices swept through the tables. I saw the governor lean over and speak to his wife, his eyes darting between me and Harrison. I saw a prominent real estate developer pull out his smartphone, likely searching my name in corporate registries. The anonymity I maintained for years was evaporating, but I did not care. The sacrifice was necessary to secure the final victory. I glanced past Tiffany and Brenda. I looked at Trent. The groom sat at the head table. The color had drained entirely from his face. Trent was raised in a strict, traditional environment. His father taught him to value respect, honesty, and loyalty above all else. Trent watched his father bow to me. He heard Tiffany call me a maid just 2 minutes prior. He watched his new wife publicly mock a woman his parents treated with reverence. The illusion of the sweet, innocent local girl shattered right in front of his eyes. Trent realized he had been played. He realized the woman wearing the designer wedding dress was a cruel, manipulative fraud. He slowly pushed his chair away from the table. His hands balled into tight fists resting on his knees. Trent stood up from his chair. He ignored Tiffany. He walked around the head table and took slow, deliberate steps toward the center of the dance floor. He looked at his father, seeking an explanation. He looked at me, seeing me for the first time, not as his wife's ugly sister, but as a human being worthy of his family's respect. Harrison sensed his son's confusion. He turned his back to me and faced the crowd. He looked at the dropped microphone. He looked at Tiffany, standing mute in the spotlight. Then he looked at Brenda. His sharp eyes narrowed into a fierce glare. He recognized my mother from the rehearsal dinner. He remembered Brenda intercepting him. He remembered Brenda calling me the help. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in Harrison's mind. The billionaire patriarch realized his corporate savior was being abused by the very people hosting this event. The anger radiating from him was palpable. This was the moment. The visual trap I set months ago when I bought the cheap black polyester dress had finally detonated. Brenda and Tiffany wanted to humiliate me. They wanted a public execution. Instead, they orchestrated my coronation. The silence in the ballroom stretched out, tense and fragile. Every guest waited to see what would happen next. They waited for an explanation. They wanted to know why the banquet maid was standing shoulder to shoulder with the Sterling family. Harrison did not disappoint them. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and prepared to deliver a revelation that would burn Brenda's fake empire straight to the ground. The truth was about to be dragged into the light, and I was holding the match. Harrison stepped forward. The heavy silence in the ballroom felt thick enough to cut with a knife. He did not ask for a replacement microphone. He did not wait for permission to speak. A man who built a shipping empire from scratch knows how to command a room using only his voice. His baritone tone carried over the white silk tables, reaching every single guest in the back rows. "For those of you who do not know the truth," Harrison began. He gestured toward me with an open palm. "This woman standing beside my wife is Cassima White. She is the founder and sole owner of White & Associates." The name of my firm landed like a stone dropped into a quiet pond. I saw the sudden spark of recognition flash in the eyes of several corporate attorneys seated near the front. They knew the name. They knew the reputation of the ghost firm that handled the most sensitive financial crises in the Midwest. They spent their careers trying to secure meetings with my office. Now they realized the chief executive officer they feared was pouring their ice water. 2 years ago, Harrison continued pacing a few steps along the edge of the polished dance floor. When our logistics company faced a federal siege, when our family legacy stood on the brink of ruin, this brilliant strategist stepped into our boardroom. She fired the corrupt managers. She shielded our assets. She saved our lives. We owe her everything. She is a titan in the corporate world. Evelyn stepped closer to me. She intertwined her arm with mine. She squeezed my wrist, presenting a united front. The whispers exploded across the ballroom. It started as a low hum and quickly grew into a chaotic wave of shocked conversation. The wealthy guests leaned across their tables. Politicians whispered behind their napkins. They stared at my cheap black polyester uniform. 5 minutes ago, they viewed me as the hired help. They chuckled when my sister mocked me. Now they looked at me with sheer awe. They realized the woman they laughed at possessed the power to dismantle their own businesses before breakfast. A local bank president spilled his water glass, too stunned to notice the puddle soaking the tablecloth. On the dance floor, Tiffany looked as if all the blood had drained from her veins. Her skin turned paper white, her jaw trembled. She looked down at the dropped microphone, then back up at Harrison. Her mind failed to process the reality unfolding in front of her. The ugly sister she had banished to a windowless closet was being hailed as a corporate savior by her new father-in-law. Tiffany spent her entire life believing she was superior. She believed her beauty pageants and her leased sports car made her a winner. She thought tearing me down elevated her status. Now standing in her expensive wedding gown, she looked remarkably small and pathetic. The 5 sorority sisters who spent the morning laughing at me now stood clustered near the cake table, looking terrified. They had participated in the cruel jokes. They had watched Tiffany throw a muddy shoe at my chest. Now they realized the woman they mocked could ruin their future careers with a single phone call. They quietly stepped away from Tiffany, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. Brenda broke the spell. She could not accept this reality. Her entire identity relied on me being a failure. If I was successful, her narrative died. She rushed forward. Her emerald gown swished loudly as she marched toward the VIP table. She pushed past a confused waiter. Her face was flushed with panic and wine. "Harrison, there must be a mistake," Brenda stammered. Her voice sounded thin and frantic. She stripped away her polished matriarch persona in an instant. "You are confused," Brenda insisted, waving her hands in the air. "Casima just types emails for pennies. She lives in a cheap apartment, she drives a horrible old car. She is my daughter, but she is nobody. She is just trying to steal the attention from Tiffany. Do not let her manipulate you. She is lying." Brenda was frantic. She tried to grab Harrison by the sleeve to pull his attention away from me. She wanted to shove me back into the shadows. She wanted to put the lid back on the box, but the truth was already out in the open. Harrison did not pull away. He stood his ground. Harrison turned his body to face Brenda. The look on his face was not anger. It was pure, unfiltered disgust. He stared down at her as if she were an insect crawling across his pristine floor. He let her desperate words hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the entire room to witness her profound ignorance. "Your daughter?" Harrison asked. His voice dripped with venom. "You share blood with this extraordinary woman, and you treat her like dirt. You made the woman who holds half the corporate leverage in this state stand in a dark corner. I heard you call her the help at the rehearsal dinner. My wife and I watched you force her to wear a servant uniform. You made a Titan scrub shoes. You are a fool, Brenda. You are a shallow, ignorant fool." Brenda stopped walking. Her designer heels froze on the hardwood floor. Harrison's words hit her like a physical blow. She recoiled, clutching her chest. The illusion she spent decades building shattered into a million jagged pieces right there on the marble dance floor. Brenda looked around the room, searching for a friendly face. She found none. The local politicians averted their eyes. The cattle ranchers whispered behind their hands. The society wives she played tennis with were glaring at her. Her entire social network evaporated in less than 60 seconds. She had traded her daughter's dignity for a chance at high society, and now she had neither. The wealthy friends she invited to witness her triumph were now staring at her with deep contempt. They realized she was not a sophisticated society woman. She was a cruel, insecure bully who abused her own child. Trent Sterling stood up from his chair. He took 2 steps away from Tiffany. He looked at his bride, seeing the ugly truth hiding underneath the expensive lace and imported orchids. Tiffany reached her hand out toward him. Tears welled in her eyes, but Trent shook his head. He took another step back. The fairy tale was dead. The room buzzed with the electric thrill of a scandal breaking in real time. I did not feel pity for them. I felt a cool, refreshing sense of justice. For 29 years I absorbed their insults. I played the role of the quiet failure to protect my peace. I built an empire in the shadows while they built a house of cards in the sunlight. Now the wind was blowing and the cards were tumbling down. I stood quietly next to Evelyn. I felt the cold steel of my Cartier watch resting against my wrist. The social execution was finished. My mother and sister were exposed in front of the exact people they spent their lives trying to impress. They lost their social standing. They lost the respect of the Sterling family. But the public humiliation was only the first part of my plan. I knew what was coming next. The financial slaughter was about to begin. I just needed to wait for the first phone to ring. I did not say a single word to Brenda. I stood in the ambient light of the ballroom edge and let the devastating reality of Harrison Sterling's revelation sink into her bones. The grand room remained trapped in a suffocating silence. 180 wealthy guests stared at my mother with open disgust. I reached into the deep pocket of my cheap polyester uniform. I pulled out my secure smartphone. The bright screen illuminated my face. I opened my encrypted email application. I had drafted the final authorization message hours ago while sweating in that windowless utility closet. I pressed the send button. The digital command flew through the cellular network. It headed straight to my corporate legal team waiting on standby in Sioux Falls. The financial trap was officially sprung. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Now I just had to wait. Exactly 15 minutes. That was the standard processing time for emergency commercial loan defaults in our regional banking network. I folded my hands in front of me and watched the timer start in my mind. Brenda stood frozen on the dance floor for a few moments longer. Her brain scrambled to find an exit route. Her survival instinct finally kicked in. She tried to patch the massive hole in her sinking ship. She turned away from me and focused all her desperate energy on Harrison. She forced a rigid, terrifying smile onto her face. "Harrison, please listen to me," Brenda begged. Her voice trembled. She clasped her hands together in a pleading gesture. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. Cosima has always been a difficult, disturbed child. She tells tall tales to get attention. She is jealous of her beautiful sister. You cannot believe her lies." Harrison did not even dignify her pathetic desperation with a verbal response. He simply turned his back on her. He signaled to his private security detail standing near the ballroom exit. Evelyn looked at Brenda with ice in her eyes. The Sterling family built their empire on loyalty and truth. They recognized a toxic fraud when they saw one. Tiffany tried to grab Trent by the arm. Trent pulled his wrist away sharply. He took another step backward, putting physical distance between himself and the bride. He looked at the woman he just married, as if she were wearing a mask that had suddenly slipped off. The sweet, innocent local girl vanished. The cruel, manipulative bully stood exposed in her designer gown. Brenda owned a high-end fashion boutique in the wealthiest shopping district of our city. She started the business 10 years ago, using the life insurance payout from my late father. She blew through that original seed money in 3 short years. She cared more about dressing store mannequins in imported Italian silk than she cared about paying her own residential mortgage. She kept the boutique afloat by taking out predatory commercial loans with astronomical interest rates. She believed she could outrun the debt forever. She funded her luxury vehicle, her expensive clothes, and Tiffany's lavish lifestyle using lines of credit secured by the failing store. She did not know my private equity firm bought that toxic debt last month. I held the mortgage. I held the commercial leases. I controlled her entire financial existence. The 15 minutes passed in agonizing slow motion. The ballroom guests remained in their seats. They were too fascinated by the unfolding disaster to leave their tables. Waiters stood frozen against the walls holding heavy trays of untouched food. The only sound in the room was the soft clinking of ice melting in crystal water glasses. Then a sharp buzzing sound cut through the heavy tension. It came from the head table. Brenda's designer clutch purse was vibrating against the white silk tablecloth. Brenda ignored it at first. She was too busy trying to corner Evelyn, begging for a moment to explain. The purse buzzed again. Then it started ringing. A loud, obnoxious ringtone echoed across the silent room. Tiffany's maid of honor awkwardly picked up the heavy purse and handed it to my mother. Brenda snatched the bag. She pulled out her smartphone. She looked at the bright screen, her face contorted in deep confusion. It was her commercial bank manager, a man who never called her personal cell phone after business hours. She silenced the call and shoved the phone back into her purse. 5 seconds later, the phone rang again. And again. The screen flashed relentlessly through the thin fabric of the clutch. Within 2 minutes, she had 49 missed calls from her bank, her creditors, and her boutique landlord. The automated alert system was working flawlessly. Her hand shook violently. She finally opened the purse, swiped the screen, and brought the phone to her ear. "Hello," Brenda snapped. She tried to maintain her authoritative tone, but her voice cracked. I watched her face. I watched the exact second her fake empire crumbled into dust. The bank manager on the other end of the line was not calling to offer a credit extension. He was calling to inform her that White Holdings LLC had executed the default clauses on her retail portfolio. Her commercial loans were called in immediately due to multiple severe breaches of financial covenants. Her credit lines were instantly frozen. The commercial locks on her boutique doors were being changed by a private security firm at that very moment. The inventory was seized. The business was foreclosed on. Brenda dropped her arm. The expensive smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and cracked the glass screen. Brenda let out a guttural, agonizing scream right in the middle of the ballroom. It was a raw, primal sound of total defeat. It was the sound of a woman realizing she possessed absolutely nothing. "What did you do?" Brenda shrieked. She lunged forward. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. Her emerald gown dragged across the floor as she stumbled toward me. "My store is gone. They locked my doors. My accounts are frozen. What did you do to me?" I stepped out from behind Evelyn. I stood tall in my cheap uniform. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for nearly 3 decades. I kept my voice calm and icy. It cut through her hysteria like a surgical blade. "I did not do anything, Mother," I replied. "I just stopped paying for your lies. You built a life on borrowed money and stolen dignity. You thought you could treat me like a servant while you spent cash you did not possess. You dug your own grave. I just handed you the shovel." Brenda sobbed openly. Dark mascara ran down her cheeks, ruining her perfect aesthetic. "You ruined me," she cried. "You ruined your sister's perfect day. You ruined this beautiful wedding." "I bought this day," I said. I raised my voice just enough so the entire room could hear the final truth. "You called me a failure," I continued. "You demanded I empty my savings account to pay the $25,000 venue deposit because your credit cards were maxed out. You threatened to banish me from the family if I refused. I paid that deposit, but I did not pay it with a personal check." Brenda stopped crying for a fraction of a second. Deep confusion washed over her tear-stained face. "I paid the deposit through my company," I stated clearly. "White Holdings LLC is the sole contract holder for the Black Hills estate tonight. I own the cancellation rights. I control the guest list. I own the vendor agreements, which means this venue belongs to me for the evening." I raised my arm and gestured toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom. "And I think it is time for you to leave my property." The guests gasped again. The ultimate reversal of power was complete. The mother, who ordered her daughter to wait outside by the dumpsters, was now being evicted from the biggest social event of the decade by that exact same daughter. I watched Brenda collapse to her knees on the dance floor. The financial severance was absolute. The battle was won. But as I looked at Tiffany, weeping near the head table, I knew the groom was preparing to deliver the final, fatal blow to their shattered dreams. Brenda knelt on the floor, gasping for air. The guests watched her financial execution in stunned silence. My eyes shifted away from the broken matriarch. I looked toward the head table. Trent Sterling finally snapped out of his paralysis. Trent stood up tall. The polite, easygoing groom vanished. A cold, furious man took his place. He stepped down from the raised platform. He walked past the overturned chairs and the untouched plates of prime rib. He ignored Brenda sobbing on the hardwood. He walked straight toward his bride. Tiffany saw him coming. She wiped a streak of mascara from her cheek. She arranged her face into a mask of wounded innocence. She reached her hands out toward him, expecting a rescue. She expected her rich, handsome husband to protect her from the harsh reality of her own actions. She expected him to order me out of the room. Trent did not take her hands. He stopped 3 feet away from her. He stared at her fingers reaching for his tuxedo jacket, and he took a deliberate step backward. He looked at her as if she carried a contagious disease. Trent was raised by Harrison and Evelyn. They possessed billions, but they built that wealth on a bedrock of ironclad ethics. His parents taught him to respect the people who mopped the floors just as much as the people sitting in the boardrooms. Trent valued honesty above any financial asset. He believed he had married a humble, sweet girl from South Dakota. Tiffany fed him a steady diet of calculated lies for an entire year. She told Trent I was a lazy deadbeat. She claimed I refused to contribute a single dime to the wedding fund. She painted a picture of a selfish, jealous older sister who spent her days sleeping on a cheap mattress while Tiffany worked tirelessly to support our struggling mother. Now the truth stood right in front of him. The deadbeat sister was actually a corporate titan wearing a cheap polyester uniform. The lazy sibling had secretly paid the venue deposit to secure his wedding day. And the woman who saved his family from federal prosecution had just been called a maid by the woman wearing his wedding ring. "You lied to me," Trent said. His voice started low, but the fury behind his words made the audio carry across the quiet ballroom. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. Tiffany blinked rapidly. She forced fresh tears into her eyes. "Trent, please," she sobbed, taking a step toward him. "You do not understand. Cosima is awful to me behind closed doors. She planned this to ruin our special day. It was just a joke. I was just trying to make the guests laugh." "A joke," Trent repeated. The veins in his neck stood out. "You threw a microphone at a woman my father bows to. You forced your own blood relative to stand in a dark corner wearing a banquet outfit. You told me she refused to help. Meanwhile, she owns the building we are standing in right now." Tiffany lowered her hands. The fake innocence stopped working. Panic flooded her features. She looked at Evelyn and Harrison sitting nearby, hoping her new in-laws would intervene. Evelyn turned her face away. Harrison crossed his arms, letting his son handle the mess. "You are a bully," Trent continued. His voice shook with raw anger. "You abused your sister for sport. You humiliated her in front of my family. I brought you into my home. I introduced you to my parents. I gave you my name. You used this day to torture the person who saved my father from going to prison." "Trent, we can fix this," Tiffany pleaded, her voice cracked, her confident facade fractured. "We can talk about this in private. Please do not cause a scene in front of the governor. We are married now." Trent shook his head slowly. He scanned the white lace on her designer gown, then met her tear-stained gaze. "I do not know you," he said. "The woman I fell in love with does not exist. You played a character. You faked a personality to get a ring on your finger." The ballroom remained deathly quiet. Nobody dared to clink a glass or scrape a fork. The wealthy elite watched a high society marriage disintegrate before the ink on the license even dried. I watched from the edge of the dance floor. I did not intervene. I let the consequences of Tiffany's actions fall square on her shoulders. She wanted the spotlight. Now she had it. "Get on your knees," Trent demanded. The command echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Tiffany gasped. She took a stumbling step backward. Her high heels caught the edge of her long train. She caught her balance, staring at her groom in pure shock. "Excuse me," Tiffany whispered. "I said, Get on your knees, Trent repeated. His tone offered zero room for negotiation. You will get down on the floor right now. You will look your sister in the eye. You will apologize to Cosima for every single cruel thing you have done to her. Tiffany shook her head. Her ego fought a desperate battle against her greed. She was a former pageant queen. She spent her life demanding people bow to her. Kneeling in front of the South Dakota elite went against every narcissistic bone in her body. Trent, I cannot do that, she cried. People are watching. Please, you are humiliating me. You humiliated yourself, Trent fired back. He pointed a firm finger toward the hardwood floor. Apologize to her. If you refuse to drop to your knees and beg for her forgiveness this instant, I am leaving this building alone. I will call my lawyers from the car. This marriage will be annulled by Monday morning. The threat of annulment hung in the air. An annulment meant she walked away with nothing. No trust fund, no estate, no shiny sports cars or endless credit cards. If Trent erased the marriage, she would be sent back to a mother who currently possessed zero assets and a mountain of seized debt. Tiffany looked at Brenda. Brenda was still kneeling near the head table, weeping into her hands, unable to offer any guidance. Tiffany was isolated on an island of her own making. She looked at me. I stood tall in my cheap polyester dress. I crossed my arms over my chest and waited. I did not smile this time. I offered her a blank, unyielding stare. The greed won. Tiffany let out a broken, miserable sob. Her knees buckled. She sank toward the ground. The expensive white silk of her custom gown pooled around her on the dirty dance floor. The delicate lace snagged on the dropped microphone. She knelt in front of me. Her shoulders shook. Real tears streamed down her face, ruining the $10,000 makeup job. She looked up at me from the floor. The golden child, the flawless bride, reduced to a groveling mess in front of 180 witnesses. I am sorry, Tiffany choked out. The words sounded like shattered glass leaving her throat. Cosima, I am sorry. Please forgive me. I was wrong. I was cruel. Please just tell Trent you forgive me. She begged the sister she stepped on her entire life. She begged the woman she banished to a hot utility closet just hours prior. I looked down at her. I felt the collective gaze of the wealthiest people in the state waiting for my response. They wondered if I would show mercy. They wondered if the corporate titan would spare the weeping bride. I held the power to save her marriage or end it with a single sentence. I knew exactly what I needed to say to trigger the final phase of their social ruin. I looked down at the woman kneeling on the hardwood floor. Tiffany sobbed, her chest heaving under the expensive lace of her designer gown. Her tears smeared her heavy makeup, leaving dark trails of mascara running down her cheeks. She reached out with trembling hands, desperate to grab the hem of my cheap polyester uniform. I took a slow, deliberate step backward. I refused to let her fingers touch my clothes. She begged me to forgive her. She pleaded with me to save her fake marriage. She wanted me to fix the disaster she created, just like she always expected me to fix her problems in the past. For 29 years, she walked over me. She threw my clothes in the dirt. She mocked my career. She treated me like a worthless servant. She built her entire identity on the delusion that she was superior to me. Now that delusion lay shattered on the dance floor. I did not feel sorry for her. I felt nothing but cold, undeniable clarity. A few feet away, Brenda was hyperventilating. My mother knelt beside her broken smartphone. The screen was shattered, mirroring her financial reality. Her commercial credit lines were frozen. Her boutique doors were locked by private security. She gasped for air, clutching the fabric of her emerald gown. Brenda looked up from the floor. She did not look at me. She looked toward the VIP tables, desperate to find a single sympathetic face. She searched for a lifeline among the elite society she worshipped. She found only disgust. The wealthy guests no longer viewed my mother and sister as peers. The illusion of their sophistication was dead. The elite crowd saw them for exactly what they were. They were greedy, cruel frauds who abused their own family for a fleeting taste of power. A prominent state senator sat at table 2. He slowly placed his linen napkin on the table, stood up, and turned his back on Brenda. His wife followed his lead. She gathered her expensive silk evening wrap and draped it over her shoulders. She looked down at Tiffany weeping on the floor. "Trash the politician," wife muttered. Her voice was not loud, but in the heavy silence of the ballroom, the word carried like a thunderclap. That single word triggered an avalanche. The social ruin was swift and unforgiving. The wealthy cattle ranchers, the corporate attorneys, and the local judges began pushing their chairs back. They did not say goodbye to the bride. They did not offer their condolences to the mother. They simply turned their backs. They formed a silent, unified wall of rejection. They walked toward the exits, abandoning the sinking ship without a shred of hesitation. The catering manager stood near the kitchen doors. He watched the billionaires and politicians leaving the room. He watched the Sterling family standing beside me. Earlier that evening, this same manager ordered me to pour ice water for the guests. He thought I was a temporary hire. Now he realized the truth. He knew White Holdings LLC owned the master contract for the venue tonight. He realized the woman wearing the $20 uniform was his ultimate boss. The manager caught my eye. He gave a quick, respectful nod, silently asking for instructions. I raised my hand and signaled for him to end the service. The manager turned to his staff. He snapped his fingers. The waiters sprang into action. They did not wait for the remaining guests to finish their meals. They began clearing the prime rib plates. They swept the expensive crystal wine glasses onto their silver trays. They moved with quiet, efficient speed, dismantling the lavish reception right in front of the kneeling bride. The party was officially over. I was evicting them from my property. Tiffany realized the room was emptying. She heard the clinking of silverware being cleared away. She looked up at Trent. Her groom stood a few feet away, his face carved from stone. "Trent, please do not leave me," Tiffany cried. Her voice cracked into a pathetic whine. "I apologized to her. I did what you asked. Please, we can still go on our honeymoon. We can forget this ever happened." Trent reached up to the lapel of his custom tuxedo. He grabbed the delicate white orchid boutonniere pinned to his jacket. He ripped the flower from the fabric. He dropped the crushed orchid onto the dance floor. "I am calling my legal team from the car," Trent said. His voice offered zero warmth. "Do not contact my family ever again." He turned his back on his bride and walked away. He did not look back. The annulment was guaranteed. Tiffany let out a fresh wail of despair. She slumped forward, resting her hands on the floor. The white silk of her train soaked up the spilled wine from Brenda's dropped glass. Cassima Tiffany choked out, turning her tear-stained face back toward me. "Help me. Tell them you forgive me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have to help me. I am your sister." I looked down at her. I studied the panic in her eyes. She still believed she could manipulate me. She still thought family loyalty was a weapon she could use to escape accountability. I did not offer her my hand. I did not accept her fake apology. "I serve the truth, Tiffany," I said. My voice was calm and even, echoing the cruel toast she delivered just 10 minutes prior. "And you just lost your shine." Her mouth opened in silent shock. She finally realized the gravity of her situation. She was entirely alone. I turned my back on her. I turned my back on the mother who drained my childhood of joy. I severed the invisible chains that held me to their toxic dynamic for almost 3 decades. Harrison Sterling stepped forward. The billionaire patriarch moved to my left side. Evelyn Sterling stepped to my right. They flanked me, forming a solid physical barrier between me and my broken biological family. Brenda saw me turning away. Desperation fueled her final, pathetic attempt to regain control. She scrambled up from the floor. Her knees wobbled. She reached her hands out, trying to grab my shoulder. "Cosima, wait!" Brenda shrieked. "You cannot leave me like this. My store is gone. I have nothing. You have to fix my credit lines. You owe me. I raised you." She lunged toward me. Harrison raised his arm. He blocked her path with rigid authority. He did not touch her, but his imposing presence forced Brenda to stop dead in her tracks. "Do not take another step toward Ms. White," Harrison warned. His tone was low and dangerous. "If you attempt to contact her again, my personal legal team will ensure you never see the inside of a courtroom without facing a dozen harassment charges. You will disappear from this state. Do you understand me?" Brenda shrank back. The fight drained out of her body. She nodded slowly, terrified of the powerful man standing in front of her. Evelyn linked her arm gently through mine. "Let us go, Cosima," she said softly. "You have spent enough time in the dark." I walked away. The three of us moved in perfect unison. We walked down the center of the grand ballroom. We passed the abandoned tables and the half-empty wine glasses. The catering staff stepped aside, offering respectful nods as we passed. I did not look over my shoulder. I kept my eyes fixed on the heavy glass exit doors. Behind me, the sound of Tiffany weeping blended with the noise of waiters stacking chairs. My mother and sister were left stranded in the middle of a cold, empty dance floor. Their fake empire was reduced to ash. Their social standing was erased. They had no money, no powerful in-laws, and no scapegoat left to blame for their failures. They were utterly destroyed by the truth. I pushed the glass doors open. The cool evening air washed over my face, carrying the scent of pine trees and fresh rain. The heavy atmosphere of the toxic wedding vanished. I stepped out onto the front patio of the estate. The social execution was flawless. The financial severance was complete. But as I stood under the South Dakota night sky with the most powerful family in the state, I knew the final chapter of this story was just beginning to unfold. I walked out of the estate manor and stepped into the crisp evening air. The summer heat had broken, leaving behind a cool, steady breeze that brushed against my face. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 29 years, the oxygen filling my lungs felt clean. The suffocating weight of my mother's expectations evaporated into the night. I stood on the wide stone steps of the venue. Harrison and Evelyn Sterling stood right beside me. Harrison raised his right hand. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the circular driveway. A sleek black chauffeured SUV pulled up to the curb, tires crunching softly against the gravel. The driver stepped out instantly, wearing a crisp dark suit, and opened the rear passenger door. He stood at attention, waiting. This was how true power operated. It did not require screaming or throwing shoes. It moved with quiet, precise dignity. Harrison turned to face me. The ambient light from the manor entrance illuminated the deep lines around his eyes. He looked at my cheap polyester uniform, then up to my face. "Cosima," Harrison said, shaking my hand warmly. His grip conveyed immense gratitude and respect. "My wife and I are deeply sorry for what you endured tonight. We watched your own family treat you like dirt. We had no idea you were subjected to that kind of environment. You saved our legacy. You protected our company when the federal government tried to tear us apart. You deserved a seat at the head table today." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Harrison. But I prefer my seat in the shadows. It gives me a much better view of the board." Harrison let out a low, rumbling laugh. "I believe that. You play a ruthless game of chess. Let us give you a ride home. We refuse to let you drive yourself after a night like this. Besides, we have a lot of business to discuss next week. I want to retain White Holdings for a new acquisition in Chicago." I smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed smile. "I would like that very much," I replied. Evelyn wrapped her arms around my shoulders one last time. "Call my assistant on Monday morning," she whispered. "We are taking you to lunch. A real lunch, not a cold salad in a kitchen corner." I nodded, thanking her for her kindness. I stepped toward the waiting vehicle. I climbed into the back of the SUV. The leather seats felt soft and cool. The driver shut the heavy door with a solid, satisfying thud. The noise of the outside world vanished, replaced by the silent, climate-controlled interior of the luxury car. The engine hummed to life. The vehicle began to pull away from the curb. I rolled down the tinted window just a few inches. I wanted one final look at the empire I had just dismantled. Through the glass, I saw the heavy manor doors swing open. Brenda stumbled out onto the stone patio. She looked older than her 55 years. Her emerald gown hung loosely on her frame, stained with spilled wine and dirt from kneeling on the dance floor. She clutched her shattered cell phone in her right hand. She looked wildly around the driveway, searching for her least luxury SUV, searching for a way out of the nightmare. She had no money to pay the valet. She had no credit cards left to swipe. Her boutique was gone. Her social standing was erased. She sat down heavily on the bottom step and buried her face in her hands, sobbing. A few seconds later, Tiffany appeared in the doorway. My sister did not look like a radiant bride anymore. She looked like a defeated child. The custom designer gown dragged behind her, torn at the seams and coated in dust. Her expensive makeup ran down her neck in dark, muddy streaks. She walked down the steps, ignoring our crying mother. She sank onto the concrete curb. She hugged her knees to her chest and wept into the ruined silk. In the distance, standing near a row of tall hedges, I spotted Trent. He held his phone to his ear. He was speaking in short, sharp sentences, pacing back and forth. He was already talking to his legal team. The annulment paperwork would hit a judge's desk before the sun came up on Monday. He never once looked back at the woman crying on the curb. I watched my mother and sister shrink into small, pathetic figures as the SUV drove down the long, winding driveway. They were stranded in the dark, wearing expensive clothes they could no longer afford, mourning a life they destroyed with their own greed. I rolled the window up. The tinted glass sealed them away forever. I leaned back against the leather headrest. I closed my eyes. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of guilt. I looked for sadness. I expected to feel at least a small pang of regret for orchestrating the downfall of my own blood relatives. I found nothing. My chest felt incredibly light. My mind remained calm and focused. I felt no guilt because I did not force them to be cruel. I did not force my mother to take out predatory loans. I did not force Tiffany to throw a shoe at my chest or call me a maid on a microphone. I merely provided the stage, and they chose to act out their own destruction. I handed them the rope, and they tied the knot themselves. Establishing a firm boundary is never a punishment. It is a declaration of self-worth. It is the moment you look at the people taking advantage of your silence and decide their comfort is no longer worth your pain. The SUV glided onto the main highway, leaving the Black Hills estate far behind. The driver kept the radio off, respecting the quiet atmosphere. I watched the passing streetlights cast rhythmic shadows across the luxurious cabin. I thought about the $25,000 deposit I had paid to secure the venue. To Brenda, that money was a life-saving raft. To me, it was a simple business expense. The holding company would write it off as a corporate event cost. By tomorrow morning, the estate manager would send the final invoice to my office, and my accounting department would settle the catering tab without a second thought. I owned the night, and I closed the ledger on my terms. Tomorrow, Brenda would wake up to a barrage of legal notices. The bank would repossess her leased vehicle. The commercial landlord would list her boutique space for rent. She would have to pack her clothes into cardboard boxes and face the reality of bankruptcy court. Tiffany would wake up in her childhood bedroom, stripped of her new last name, facing a town that now knew exactly who she really was. They would try to call me. I knew the pattern. First, they would call with anger, demanding I fix the mess. When I ignored those calls, they would try crying. They would leave voicemails filled with fake apologies, begging for a loan, pleading for a second chance. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted phone. I navigated to my contact list. I found Brenda's number. I pressed the block button. I found Tiffany's number. I pressed block. I erased their digital access to my life in 2 swift taps. The vehicle turned onto my street. It pulled up to the curb in front of my modest apartment building. I liked this building. It was quiet, unassuming, and safe. I had the funds to buy a penthouse downtown, but I preferred the peace of a normal neighborhood. Perhaps next month I would upgrade to a larger house in the suburbs. A house with a dedicated home office and a large garden. I could do whatever I wanted now, without the fear of my family finding out and demanding a cut of my success. The driver hurried around the front of the SUV and opened my door. I thanked him and stepped out onto the sidewalk and walked up the steps to my front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open. The apartment was exactly how I left it. Quiet, peaceful, mine. I took off the cheap black polyester dress and threw it directly into the trash can. I did not need the uniform anymore. My shift was over. If you are watching this, and you are the one who always pays the price for your family's ego, hear me now. Stop paying. Maybe you are the sibling who constantly writes the checks to cover their bad decisions. Maybe you are the daughter who absorbs their insults just to keep the peace at holiday dinners. Maybe you are the one they hide in the shadows because your success threatens their fragile reality. You do not owe them your dignity. You do not owe them your bank account. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to treat you like a servant. Stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Stop funding the delusions of toxic relatives who only love what you can provide for them. When you cut off their supply, they will call you selfish. Let them. Their anger is just the sound of a parasite losing its host. Protect your peace. Build your own empire in silence. Focus on your own growth, secure your own future, and let them bankrupt themselves. They will eventually collapse under the weight of their own arrogance, and you will have a front row seat to the finale. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that silence is the best revenge and that setting boundaries is the ultimate form of self-care, drop a comment below and let me know how you handled your own toxic family members. Please hit the like button, subscribe to Grape Vengeance for more stories about karma and justice, and never forget your own worth. Take care of yourselves out there. I will see you in the next one.